I remember the first time I heard about Mark Reeves. People said the lake whispered his name, not once, but again and again, until he walked straight into the water. It sounded like another small-town rumor, the kind that fades after a few days. But I've listened to the tape he left behind. You can hear him breathing, scared, whispering. It's calling again. It knows my name. Then there's a drip of water and nothing else. They found his boat still idling near the center of Blackwater Lake. The fishing rod snapped in half. No sign of him anywhere. I've been to that lake. When you stand there at dawn, it's so still you can hear your own heartbeat. Locals say the lake doesn't take people by mistake. It waits, and when it calls, some folks just can't stop themselves from answering. Mark Reeves was 47 when he came back to Blackwater Lake. He'd lost his job, his marriage had fallen apart, and his kids were grown. He told a few people he wanted quiet, a few days to fish, think, and clear his head. I can picture that first morning. Mist lying flat on the surface, air so cold his breath drifted like smoke. He pushed off from the dock in an old aluminum boat that creaked with every movement. When the water settled, he saw his own reflection, so clear it looked like a mirror, but when he lifted his arm, the reflection didn't lift right away. It hesitated just half a second behind him. He laughed it off and started the motor, heading toward the same cove he used to fish with his father. By the second day, he'd settled into a rhythm. Up before sunrise, coffee from a dented thermos, 2 lines in by 6 o'clock. Then he started hearing it, a humming sound from somewhere under the dock. Not loud, not threatening, just a slow tune that never carried with the wind. When it stopped, the silence felt heavier than before. Later, as the sun warmed the surface, he noticed small bubbles rising beside the boat. No fish jumping, no wind, yet the water moved. He leaned over to look, and that's when he heard it, his own name, whispered like a child calling from far away. Mark. He froze. Then again, Mark, come back. That night, he told a local man what he'd heard. The old man didn't laugh. He just said, "That lake keeps what it likes," turned around, and left the store without another word. The next morning, Mark went out again, maybe to prove to himself there was nothing to fear. The fog was thicker. No birds, no insects, just quiet. He cast his line and felt a tug almost right away, a slow, heavy pull that bent the rod. He braced himself, thinking he'd hooked a big one, but the pull wasn't random. It came in steady, timed jerks, like something strong was reeling him in. When the line finally surfaced, tangled in weeds, he found an old rusted hook tied to the end. He recognized it instantly, the same model he and his father used when he was a kid. The side was bent in the exact same place. He turned it in his hand, and the metal felt warm, though the air was cold. Then the reel began to spin on its own, slow at first, then faster, line sliding out as if the water itself was taking it. He grabbed the handle, tried to stop it, but it wouldn't. And over the soft whine of the reel, he heard laughter, light, breathy, coming from just below the surface. He yanked hard. The line snapped. The sound stopped. That night, the fog came early. Around 9:47 p.m., his phone recorded its last message. I've heard part of it, water splashing gently, then a soft child's voice repeating his name again and again. After that, only the hum of the boat engine. When search crews found the boat the next morning, it was drifting in the middle of the lake. The motor was still running. Inside, nothing looked disturbed, not even his lunch. But the floor was wet, and the water pooled around his boots was warm to the touch. They followed the fishing line still hanging over the side. Halfway down, it caught on something heavy. When they pulled, a pale shape rose through the dark water. One of the deputies said it looked just like a person, same build as Mark, same hair. Only the eyes were wide open and black as the lake around them. He said it stared right at him before sliding back under without a single ripple. When they checked the boat again, they found small handprints pressed into the metal hull, too small for a grown man, deep enough to dent the surface. They searched for 4 days. Sonar, divers, dogs on the shoreline, nothing. On the 5th morning, his boat drifted back to the same spot where it had first been found. Everything inside was neat, almost arranged. His tackle box was latched tight. When they opened it, there was a single photograph inside. It showed a young boy standing on a dock, holding a fishing rod. It was Mark at 13, but in the picture, the reflection in the water wasn't facing the same direction. It was turned upward, looking straight at the camera. The sheriff called it an accidental drowning. Locals never believed that. They said the lake had called him since he was a kid, and this time he finally answered. Some mornings, before the mist clears, people still claim they hear a faint humming drifting across the water. Listen long enough, they say, and it begins to sound like a name. They say lakes don't echo, but this one does. It calls back to whoever's listening. When the surface is still and you think you're alone, you can hear it, a quiet voice beneath the water, waiting for someone to reply. He went out fishing to forget his mistakes. The problem was, the lake didn't forget him. When they found his boat drifting along the river bend near Bend, Oregon, the engine was off and the water was calm. Inside, there was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no overturned tackle, not even a broken rod. Only one thing stood out: 2 coffee cups, both half full. One of them was still steaming. At first, everyone thought it was just another accident, an old man falling overboard. But when the sheriff's office pulled the line from his reel, they found it wasn't attached to any hook. Instead, it was tied to a ring, a wedding ring. And that's when they realized this wasn't a simple drowning. I've listened to the dispatch audio from that morning. The deputy who arrived first said something that stuck with me. He said, "It looked like whoever was with him was still sitting there." His name was Henry Cole, 68 years old, a retired postal worker from Corvallis. He'd been a widower for almost 3 years. Friends said he was kind, quiet, and still wore his wedding band everywhere he went. After his wife, Ellen, passed away from cancer, he stopped talking much to people. What little peace he had came from fishing. He owned a small cabin near a place called Willow Pond. Not really a pond, more like a widening of the river that stretched under heavy pines. Locals rarely fished there anymore because the current was strange. Sometimes it moved when there wasn't wind. Other times it stayed still even when the water upstream was rough. Ellen used to go with him. They'd sit in silence, drinking coffee while the sun came up. She used to tease him about how long he'd sit there, waiting for a bite. Her one rule was always the same: don't stay out after dusk. The water remembers. After she died, he went out even more. He said the quiet helped him think. But according to the man who lived next door, Henry had started talking to himself out there, softly, like he was answering someone no one else could hear. The first odd thing happened a few weeks before he disappeared. Henry told a friend that his fishing line kept snagging on something invisible. He'd cast near the same spot he always had, and the line would tighten, stop, then go completely loose as if whatever it caught had just let go. Each time, when he reeled it back in, the line had been sliced clean. Not frayed, not tangled, cut through like someone took a knife to it. He tried replacing the line, switching reels, even changing spots, but it kept happening. He started losing sleep. One night, he told his friend at the diner that he kept dreaming of Ellen standing on the bank, calling to him. He said she looked the same as the day they buried her, only she wasn't sad, she was angry. And in every dream, she said the same thing: pull harder. He laughed when he told it. But the man listening said Henry's hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold his coffee. On the last evening anyone saw him, the weather was turning gray and heavy. The forecast said light rain, but thunder rolled in from the mountains before sunset. A neighbor saw him walking toward the dock with his old tackle box and 2 thermoses. He called out to him, told him to head back before the storm hit. Henry waved without looking up. By 9 o'clock, the rain had started. The water was restless, tapping against the side of the dock. That's when, according to the phone records, Henry made a short voice memo, something he often did to keep track of fish conditions. In that recording, you can hear him say, "It's pulling again. Strong tonight." Then the reel's drag begins to scream. He was out there for almost 30 minutes, reeling, fighting, refusing to let go. The drag sound changes during the last minute. No longer random jerks like a fish, but slow, steady pulls back and forth, almost like someone was testing him. At one point he says softly, "Ellen." Then the tape cuts off. The next morning, his boat was found turning in slow circles near the middle of Willow Pond. The current there is mild, so it shouldn't have been spinning, but it was slow, consistent, almost like it was being guided. When deputies pulled alongside, they saw his rod bent sharply over the side, line pulled tight into the water. The reel was still locked. They started to cut it loose, but something beneath gave a hard yank. The deputy jumped back, swearing he felt it pull against him like a live thing. When they finally managed to haul it up, they saw what had been caught. The line came out of the water coiled around a skeletal hand, gray, thin, still gripping Henry's wedding ring. The bones were smooth, almost polished by time underwater. The ring was verified later as his own. His name was engraved inside. The hand was never identified. No other remains were found in the lake. Forensics said it must have been old, maybe decades. But there was one detail that didn't make sense. Around the wrist, faintly visible even on the bones, were deep grooves, marks that matched the size and pattern of fishing line. Henry himself was never recovered. The sheriff's report listed accidental drowning, but people who knew him said it didn't look that way. When the rescue boat brought his craft back to shore, they found 2 coffee cups sitting side by side on the bench. One was Henry's, the old chipped mug he always carried. The other was a new one, plain white, same kind Ellen used to drink from. Both were half full. One was still warm. The tackle box was open, and inside was a single note. It wasn't a letter, just 4 words scribbled in pencil on a scrap of cardboard. The line never broke. Locals started talking after that. They said the pond was cursed, that you could sometimes see a figure on the water near sundown. An old man and a woman sitting together, lines in the water, not moving, not talking. One fisherman swore he saw them once, right before dark. When he called out, both figures turned toward him at the same time, slow, synchronized, and then they were gone. Some say guilt can drown you, but sometimes it doesn't need to. It just waits, quiet, steady, until you pick up the line again. When the water pulls, some people let go. Henry Cole never did. That's why, when the line went tight, it never snapped, and neither did he. He thought the red in the water was from the sunset, until he saw what was floating beside him. The story of what happened at Ashgrove Reservoir isn't an old legend. It happened just 5 years ago, not far from Bakersfield. It began like a weekend camping trip between friends, and ended in one of the most disturbing discoveries that small town had ever seen. I've seen the photos from the police file. The water looked calm. The light on the surface was red, reflecting the late evening sky. But when investigators arrived, they said the color didn't move with the clouds. It stayed dark, still, like a stain spreading under the reflection. 3 friends went out there that night. Only 2 came back. And when they told their story, it was so strange. Even the officers who didn't believe in curses refused to go near that reservoir after sundown. The three friends were Mike, Tyler, and Beth. They'd all grown up together in a small town nearby. The reservoir had been closed for years because of contamination issues. Locals said chemicals had leaked into the water back in the 90s, but there were other rumors too, that divers found something down there they weren't supposed to. Mike was the one who came up with the idea to camp there. He said he wanted peace and quiet, a night away from traffic and noise. They packed a cooler with beer, an old speaker, and some snacks. Tyler brought his fishing gear because he'd heard the fish were huge out there, something about being untouched for years. When they arrived, it looked like any other forgotten place. Rusted gates, warning signs covered in vines, a cracked concrete road that led down to the shore. They set up near an old service dock, a flat stretch of concrete that stuck out into the water. For a while, it felt normal. They built a fire, turned on some classic rock, and laughed about how cursed the place was supposed to be. Beth filmed short clips for social media, joking that they'd found the quietest lake in California. By the time the sun started setting, the surface of the reservoir had turned bright orange. The air was still. Everything was calm, too calm. It was Tyler who first noticed the cooler floating out near the middle of the water. At first, they thought it was trash, an old ice chest left behind by someone who used to come there before it closed. But when it drifted closer, they realized it looked new. White, with red trim, still sealed tight. They joked about it being free bait. Tyler waded in up to his knees and pulled it toward the dock with a branch. When they opened it, they found it filled with fresh fish, all the same kind, all recently cleaned and packed in neat rows of crushed ice. No one around had been fishing. The nearest road was closed. As they stared into it, a voice came from across the water, deep, raw, and angry. "That's mine." It was loud enough to echo. The three froze, scanning the opposite shore, but there was no one. The forest on that side was thick, just shadows between trees. Mike shouted back, "Hey, we're sorry. We didn't mean to take it." But no answer came, only the sound of water shifting against the dock. They waited a few minutes, then laughed it off, telling each other it was probably some other camper trying to scare them. But after that, the night didn't feel lighthearted anymore. The jokes stopped. The music got quieter, and the water, that calm water, seemed to move a little differently, like it was breathing. Later that night, their fire had burned down to embers. Tyler turned off the speaker to save battery, and that's when they noticed the sound. Splashing. Slow, measured, like footsteps through shallow water. Beth grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the edge of the dock. The beam caught a set of boot prints in the mud, large, deep, leading straight into the water. There were no prints leading back out. The sound stopped. The surface of the water was perfectly still again. Then came another sound, a soft clicking, like metal tapping metal. Tyler whispered that it might be a lure hitting a boat, but when they turned their lights toward the middle of the reservoir, there was nothing. That's when Beth said she saw it, a faint light moving under the water. It looked like a headlamp, glowing weakly below the surface, gliding just beneath them. She pointed, but by the time the others turned to look, it was gone. The silence that followed was the worst kind. No frogs, no crickets, not even wind through the trees. Just that wide, heavy quiet. Then from far across the lake, the same voice as before, only this time, closer. "You shouldn't have taken that." The words were calm, almost whispered, but they carried clear across the water. Mike told the others to pack up, that they were leaving. They threw their things into their bags and started toward the truck. Beth went back to grab her phone from the dock, but when she reached the edge, she froze. The water near the shore was moving, a slow ripple spreading outward, and from the center of it, a head began to rise. Not a mask, not a trick of light, a man's face. He was drenched, pale, his eyes wide open. He pulled himself up just enough for his shoulders to clear the surface. His hands were red. In one, he held a knife, the blade dark and dripping. He looked straight at her and said, "You shouldn't take what's mine." Beth screamed. The men ran back toward her, but before they reached the dock, the man dropped back into the water without a sound. No splash, no bubbles, just gone. They ran to the truck, drove through the broken gate, and didn't stop until they reached the nearest gas station miles away. The clerk there said they were shaking so badly they couldn't speak for several minutes. When they finally did, they told him someone had attacked them at the reservoir. He called the police immediately. The police searched the area the next morning. They found the same cooler floating near the dock again, sealed shut. Inside were the same fish, still on ice. But mixed among them were small white shapes the officers at first thought were pebbles. They weren't. They were human teeth. No one found any sign of the man in the water. But when divers went down to examine the area near the dock, they discovered several rusted hooks embedded in the mud, each tied with fresh line. As they pulled the lines in, a few of them led to small metal containers weighted down with stones. Inside each one was a scrap of wet fabric, a shoelace, a button, personal items that matched descriptions of missing campers reported over the past decade. Beth moved away from town not long after. Tyler stopped talking about it altogether, but Mike stayed. He told a neighbor that sometimes, when the light hits the water just right at sunset, you can see a man standing in the shallows, still watching, the water red around his legs. A year later, Mike told the same neighbor he'd been hearing someone outside his house at night. Just small splashes in the ditch behind his backyard. One morning, he woke up to find wet footprints leading up to his window, and then stopping there. He moved a few weeks later, leaving everything behind. Not every monster hides beneath the water. Some wade through it, waiting for the right moment to reach the shore. And when they do, you might never know which sound comes first, the ripple behind you, or the whisper saying you've taken something that was never yours to begin with.